Hi, this is Linda Walker, and welcome to my program today. My session on that's called "Help." I have no willpower: how to succeed without willpower. So, if you've ever wondered if you were the only one who doesn't have any discipline or self-control, you've come to the right place. This is the right place to be if you're really struggling with your self-control or your self-discipline, as some people call it, or willpower. We have all kinds of names for that thing that makes us feel so shameful and unhappy about our lives. So my name is Linda Walker. If you've just joined me, I am a coach. I work with creative geniuses who don't feel they've reached their potential, and I help them. They're really struggling because they're really struggling with things like being distracted by all their ideas, follow-through challenges, procrastination, and I help them channel their energy so that with a very clear intent and a clear path, they unleash their creative genius and reach their full potential. So welcome, and I'm glad that you're here right now. So I asked before for a thumbs up for people who could hear me, and I got a thumbs up, so that tells me that I'm ready to go. So one of the challenges that people face with willpower is that there's a lot of shame attached to willpower, and it's not a great thing. And people wonder, is willpower something that is very common? Are you the only person who was born without willpower? Well, there was a study done on stress by the American Psychological Association, and what they were doing, they asked a number of questions, and on the survey itself, 27% of people said that they couldn't apply the change that they had hoped to apply, and they felt that they didn't have enough willpower. So 27% of the population seems to believe they don't have any willpower. So you're not alone. You'll be happy to know. So let's define willpower. I think it'll be it's an important thing to look at. So willpower is really the ability to delay gratification and resist short-term temptation for long-term goals. So basically, I talked in the feed that I sent for this, the announcement that I sent for this, I talked about Mary who was trying to write a book and who was struggling with writing a book. Now, you may or may not be writing a book. You may have other things that you'd like to be able to achieve, and you're not, getting to them. So in her case, what she was doing, she was planning an afternoon a week when she could sit down and actually start writing her book. And it wasn't happening. And she felt really shameful about it. She felt humiliated because she had told everybody that she was going to write a book. And 5 years later, it still wasn't written. And her husband was incredibly cynical about it. He thought, she's never going to write a book. So that's one of the challenges with, when you think you have no willpower and you're struggling like that, there's a certain amount of shame with not achieving a goal that you've told everybody you were going to try to achieve. So with her, we worked together for a little while, and I will talk to you a little bit about some of the strategies that we use, despite the fact that her willpower was pretty low. So I'm seeing there's comments. I'm just going to check on comments to make sure that I am not forgetting. Hey, Becky, glad you showed up. Excellent. So I'm glad that you guys are here. I could see that comment coming in, and I was curious. So one of the studies that was an interesting study that was done is called a Marshmallow Study. It was done more than 40 years ago by a chap named Dr. Mitchell. And what he did was he took a bunch of preschoolers and put them in a room one at a time, put a marshmallow in front of them, and told them, if you are able to avoid eating that marshmallow by the time I come back, I'll give you two. I'll give you an extra one. So, of course, there was an incentive to have a second marshmallow if they were able to, to delay gratification. Well, somewhere around, I think it was 30% of the kids couldn't wait. It's very similar to what we're seeing in terms of those 27% of people who felt that they weren't able to reach their goals because they didn't think they had enough self-discipline. So Mischel, looked at that study, looked at those kids, and found out that there's a correlation between success and your ability to delay gratification, what we'll call willpower. So kids who had a lot of self-control in that study, the Marshmallow Study, were found later on in life to have better life approach. They scored higher in their SATs. They tended to have better goals. Even when they were seeing, they were shown as adults, they went back to look at them as adults. They found out that, again, as adults, they had better success in life and so on. So it seems like having so-called willpower seems to lead to success. So now I'm wondering, do creative geniuses have less willpower? That's an interesting question. When I talk about creative genius, I talk about my clients who have a huge amount of great ideas. They're very creative, but they're challenged with their ability to pay attention for long periods of time. They're distracted by all those ideas. They tend to struggle with follow through and so on because there's just so many things bouncing around in their head. So they procrastinate as well. So those are my creative genius, what I call the creative genius. And do they have less power and less willpower? It appears that they do. A study that was done by Casey in 2011, Dr. Casey went and looked at actually examined the brains of people while they were trying to exercise their willpower. And they found that the people who had more willpower, more self-control, had a much more activated prefrontal cortex. Now, the prefrontal cortex is a part of the brain, it's a tiny little part of the brain. It's actually the maestro of your brain, as Dr. Brown would say. And what's really great about it, what we know is that the prefrontal cortex is in charge of the executive functions, which regulate things like, attention, your ability to to relatively sit still, stay with a task for a long period of time, have more self-control, challenges with, or not challenges, but be better at managing your emotions, even short-term memory. So it's a really important part of your brain. And we know that creative geniuses have a different brain wiring. And that's one of the things that the study came up with was, yes, among other things, there's the prefrontal cortex, but other parts of the brain were wired somewhat differently and were functioning differently. So what that means is, if we look at creative geniuses, many of whom have attention deficit disorder, for example. Attention deficit disorder has been shown to affect or to be affected by the prefrontal cortex. People with this type of challenges of people with ADHD, for example, have problems or have a difference in their brain wiring. Specifically, or definitely part of that is the prefrontal cortex. So many creative geniuses have ADHD, and that's one of the things that or if they don't, they also have, they have a lot of the traits, So you don't have to have ADHD to struggle with willpower. It's, no matter what. If you're a creative genius, well, if you're a human, you probably struggle with willpower anyways, but if you're a creative genius, you're probably a lot more likely to to struggle with willpower. And one of the things that they found, other studies that they found, was that also when people have to make a lot of decisions, they actually struggle more with willpower after. So the more decisions you make throughout the day, the more likely that willpower will be depleted. So they know that willpower is almost a finite resource to a certain degree, and depending on what you decide to do or what you have to do throughout your day, the later in the day that you're faced with a willpower challenge, the more likely you are to struggle with willpower, because the more decisions you've made, the more challenged you are. So there was a study by Dr. Baumeister. I had to look at the way he writes his name, and what he did was he put he put a cookie and a radish in front of people who were trying to be careful about their weight, and told them, which one do you choose? Now, the people who chose the cookie, in other words, who didn't allow themselves to be drawn, didn't have to push themselves to have more willpower, they actually did better in a test afterwards, a cognitive test, because their willpower or their ability to persist wasn't depleted by that first challenge with willpower. Those who took the radish had to fight really hard. Like, imagine who would choose the cookie, or I would choose the cookie, unfortunately. But maybe you guys, how many of you would choose the cookie rather than a radish? Especially a radish. It's not really, not the most amazing vegetable they could have found. But some of you would probably have chosen the radish because you're you're trying to be very careful with your weight. But you would have had some challenges afterwards persisting in a challenging task. Why? Because you've depleted your willpower. So willpower also affects you in your persistence, your ability to persist. So if we understand that willpower is a finite resource, there are a number of different things that can be done. First of all, we know it's a finite resource because we deal with decision fatigue. So the more decisions we take in the day, the more likely we are to, at the end of the day, make really bad decisions. It's not a good thing to make a really important decision after you've had a lot of decisions to make in your day. So, for example, I talked about Mary, who's trying to write a book. One of the first things that we did, among other things, was we moved her writing to the morning, when her willpower was a lot less likely to be depleted. She wouldn't have made any decisions. She made a decision to wake up in the morning, and she made a decision to sit down and write. That was it. She didn't have to make all these other decisions. So she ended up getting up earlier to start writing. And that was a good time because her kids weren't up. She had 2 little kids, and they were challenging little boys. Now we knew also, so that's one of the things that we did for Mary, knowing that, partly knowing that the more decisions you make in the day, the less likely you are to be able to resist temptation when, and in her case, the temptation was, instead of writing, she'd be tempted to look at emails, or she'd be tempted to clean up or start supper. It was easy for her to really resist, or it was difficult for her to resist the temptation to do all these different things and write as she had planned. Especially she was doing it in the afternoon, which is not usually a great time for most people to be doing something that requires so much focus and mental energy. Now, one of the things that we know is that willpower can be strengthened with practice. There's been a lot of studies that have shown that people, it's almost like a muscle, willpower and other things can be learned, and it can be strengthened with practice. So we also know that willpower is reduced. The depletion of willpower is, let's say, it's reduced by a positive mood, very strong belief in your ability, and in a good attitude. So those are important things. For Mary, we had to change her attitude because she did feel like she had very little belief in her ability to write. She looked at her writing assignment and she, it's just not going to happen. I've never managed to make it happen. It's been 5 years. Maybe my husband is right. I'm useless when it comes to writing. And yet, that's what she did for a living. She was a writer for a living. And maybe I won't be able to write. So we had to change that belief. That was one of the things, to improve her belief. And, change also how she saw herself. Because at this point, she was seeing herself as someone who was trying to write a book, when really she needed to see herself as an author. Now, that was a bit of a challenge for her. Being an author, I'm not an author, I haven't written a book, but I'm a writer. Yes, I do write. So being able to see yourself as a writer, changing your attitude about yourself, was helpful, because then what do writers do? What do they normally do every day if they have an opportunity to do it? They write. So that was, that was one of the changes that she had to make in her, the way that she saw herself, was really to see herself, first of all, increase her belief in herself and her ability to write. I mean, she wrote already, she was able to write, but also increase her, how she saw herself. So that helped. We also know that willpower, one of the things that will help is to avoid temptation. And this is true also for creating habits. That's one way. So avoiding temptation, she had to turn off her distraction. So she had to be somewhere where there was no noise, because that was her challenge. Noise, supper, and emails, making emails, writing emails. And of course, when the kids came in, well, there's always that challenge that came up. So she turned off all those distractions. Email was not allowed to be on. She wasn't allowed to open email first thing in the morning. That was not allowed until she had finished her work. Now, studies have shown that some of the, even Mitchell, who started that first study on willpower, was saying that one of the ways to overcome willpower is using implementation intention. And I use that quite a bit in my work with my clients, with my creative genius clients. So listen, if you've just joined me or joined us, hi, my name is Linda Walker, and I work with creative geniuses who feel they haven't reached their full potential. And you are here in a live session on Help, I Have No Willpower, How to Succeed Without Willpower. So let me see, I've seen a comment or two, so I'm going to look at comments. Found that belief is essential, to accomplish anything, Dwayne says. I always struggle until I found out that the first thing to do is to change the belief. Everything else comes easier, and he's totally right about that. That is something that I have found myself. If I don't believe in myself, it's a lot easier for me not to persist. And that's true of everyone. If we don't have belief, we don't persist. So implementation intention, let me talk to you a little bit about how that works. So implementation intention, you actually form an if-then statement, or a number of if-then statements. And you do them around things that will tend to prevent you from, situations that will actually help you to reach your goal. So one if-then statement that she wrote outside of when she was writing, of course, is if it's 6 a.m., I am writing. That was an if-then intention. If the kids get up before my time, I will leave them because my husband's there too and he can get up. So it will allow me, so that's an if-then intention. So if this, then that. And creating if-then intentions around the things that normally stop you, and almost, if you really look back at what stopped you in the past, it tends to be a lot of the same things. So for her, getting up, being up at 6 a.m. and being ready to write, that was her if-then statement. So if it's 6, she's writing. The other thing that we know that's really going to make a huge difference is your motivation. So your belief and your motivation kind of go together, but your motivation, we know that people who were given the opportunity to, or told that they had to persist, so we tend to have still a little bit of willpower when we're told you have to persist, and if you persist, you'll get paid so much. Or if you persist, you'll get something better, something amazing. So or you'll help somebody else. It'll make a difference in somebody else's life. People are then more likely to persist and to have willpower for those types of things. So motivation, and the other thing that's really important in recognizing, what if I don't have willpower? Another thing that you could do is have a steadier blood glucose. So for Mary, who was trying to write a book, first thing in the morning, she needed to deal with the blood glucose thing. So one of the first things she did, she got up in the morning at 6 o'clock. She went and picked up her breakfast, brought it at her office, closed the door, and ate and wrote. So that was how we made sure that her blood glucose doesn't deplete. Because if your blood glucose is depleted, so if you're hungry, You know how they say that the commercial says if you're hungry, you're not yourself. Well, it's true. And it's also true that if you're hungry, you don't have as much willpower. You don't have as much ability to persist or resist temptation. So she sat and had breakfast while she was working. So those are things that we did. The other thing that you might want to consider when if you're struggling with willpower. So if you've just joined us, my name is Linda Walker. I work with creative geniuses who feel they haven't reached their full potential. And you are in a session right now called Help, I Have No Willpower, How to Succeed Without Willpower. So you could start with one small goal. And why would we do that? Because we know that willpower, as I mentioned before, is something that can be, that you can work on. It can actually be improved with practice. And a lot like exercise, you don't start with a 100-pound weight if you're exercising for the first time ever. You start building your muscle with the 1 pound weight. So it's a little bit like that. You want to start with one small goal. For Mary, who was trying to write a book, the one small goal, well, she's looking at her computer and she's saying, I'm going to write, but there was no clear definition originally on what she was going to do when she sat down and wrote. So what she ended up doing was we started breaking down the process and deciding on a specific thing that she would do during her writing period. Now, I'm going to stop here for a moment. I'm going to look at comments because I want to make sure that I'm able to continue to look at those things. So creative genius for Becky really resonates. Yeah, I like that definition a lot more. I think it's a lot more empowering, isn't it? And you are creative geniuses, and when you look at the type of idea, I'm always so impressed with my clients and the things that they come up with. I am certain that if we were able to help most creative geniuses get out of their own way and stop feeling so bad about willpower and those types of things, I think we could probably solve a lot of the challenges in the world. So for me, I think it's a great definition. Much more positive and empowering, Dwayne says. Thank you, Dwayne. Thank you, Becky. So up to date, we know that among the things that we want to look at, first of all, willpower can be depleted as you have more and more challenges throughout your day, or more decisions to make, or having to have exercised willpower beforehand. We also know that creative geniuses have less willpower because of a different brain wiring. It doesn't mean that they can't achieve their goals. That's not true. What it means is basically they need to find different ways of achieving their goals. We know that decision fatigue will actually worsen your ability to have willpower, your ability to persist and resist and so on. And it can be strengthened with practice. So some of those things that we know, we put into place with Mary, who was trying to write a book. So Mary, first thing we did was work on when she got up in the morning. We worked on things like breaking down the pieces that she had to have. So we want to have a small goal that's very specific so that you know what you're doing when you're sitting down and writing, for example, or whatever it is that you're trying to do. We did it early in the morning so that there wasn't a whole number of decisions that she had to make beforehand. So we broke down that process. We started first thing in the morning because the only decisions she had to make was getting up, getting breakfast, and sitting down. So there were no massive decisions. So decision fatigue was not going to be a problem for her if we did it like that. Plus, the morning for most creative geniuses tend to be good times for for cognitive work, having to think and work with your brain on things that require a fair bit of focus. So for her, it definitely was. We had looked at that, and that's something that helped. So I've talked about all kinds of things that you can do if you have no willpower. You can practice and get better. You can learn to avoid temptation. So for example, if I'm on a diet, I don't bring cookies and cake in the house. I tend to choose different types of food that I'm going to bring in because I want to make sure that I don't end up killing my diet. So one of the things that makes a huge difference, even better than all of these things that I talked to you about, is creating habits. And what does creating habits mean? Well, first, habit is, by definition, is a set of steps that you take always in the same way after they've been triggered by something. Usually it's an event or a certain time or something that's happened. It could even be another habit that you had that triggered that event. Or that new habit, and that leads to a reward. So an example is brushing your teeth. I brush my teeth every morning. As soon as I finish breakfast, for example, ending breakfast is my trigger that I need to go brush my teeth. So I get up, I go to the bathroom. So trigger is finishing the meal, go to the bathroom, pick up my toothbrush, put water on it, put toothpaste on it, and brush my teeth, floss, and then rinse and not repeat. And my result, so that's the routine, and then the result that I get out of it is, the smooth teeth like you have in close-up, and that fresh breath, and of course, long-term dental hygiene that helps. What's really cool is you probably don't even realize that you do. A lot of people will tell me, I don't have any habits. Who doesn't think that they've never been able to achieve a habit? Just put a comment or a thumbs up. Yeah, that's me. And I will, looking here, it is a vicious cycle. So if you've never managed to, or at least you don't think that you've managed to create any habits, I have news for you. I could prove to you that you have. Okay, so one of the habits that you probably have managed to have, and you don't even realize it, is that you've never, you don't show up at work accidentally naked, right? So you actually have the habit of getting dressed before you go to work. So that's a habit, and you don't even realize it because it's so mechanical. Most of us have habits like brushing my teeth. How often have you ever wondered, did I brush my teeth, and had to check your breath? Because you weren't sure, you couldn't remember whether or not you'd done it. That happens all the time to a lot of people. So it's because they're habits and they are mechanical. And what's really cool about something like a habit is that because it's mechanical, it doesn't require decision making. So if you don't have to do any decision, you don't have to make any decisions, you're not depleting your ability to persist and your ability to resist temptation. So habits, as I mentioned, actually reduce decision fatigue, and that's one of the reasons why they're so awesome. Now, again, you want to start with, if you want to start with a habit, you want to start with a 1 pound habit. That's one of the kind of the secret to the success of creating habits. If you feel like you've never really had habits in the past, I've just proved to you that you probably have. But if you want to create a new habit intentionally, start with a tiny little habit, because you want to build what was found in a number of different studies was that if you build your you could build your habits. You could build a muscle habit, as we call it. So you start with a 1 pound habit, as I call it, the small habit. So for example, in my case, maybe 3.5 years ago, I decided I was going to wake up. When I wake up in the morning, that's my trigger, I would make my bed. Now, unfortunately, on Saturday, I had a little bit of a challenge because Dwayne, for the first time, was actually still in bed. So I was debating, should I make my bed with him in it? But I decided not to. So that's how important or how powerful habits are. I actually started to make the bed and I realized, oh no, he's in bed. I can't do that. I can't make the bed. So that 1 pound habit started small, and what was really great about it was the reward was so quick, because I make my bed and then I allow myself to turn around and I look at my room, and it makes such a huge difference once your bed is made. Now some of you will say, who needs to make your bed? It's just an example. You know, you could choose any habit that you want. However, I think making your bed is an easy one because it also, what's really cool about it is it happens shortly after you wake up. So right away, you get that feeling of accomplishment of having completed your bed. So I'm going to look at comments. I'm seeing a few comments coming in. Perfectionism. Yes, Becky says perfectionism is one of the greatest enemy of willpower. It is. Currently working on the habit of not checking personal email until I have completed my top 4 priorities. I call it net 4. Awesome. I like that. Net 4. No email until those top 4 are completed. Awesome. So that's one way. So in a way, you've created an if-then statement. Have you noticed that, Becky? So if my 4 things are done, my 4 priorities are done, then I check my email. So that's an if-then statement. So awesome. High five to you. So you want to create that 1 pound habit. And perfectionism, as you mentioned, Becky, is an issue. And you know what? You almost have to recognize that perfection does not exist. It exists, you know, in higher power, but not in humans. Humans are not perfect. And waiting for things to be perfect will lead you nowhere because they're never perfect. So you're never happy. And that's something that I need to listen to myself talk because I have a tendency to be a perfectionist. So what did we do with Mary where that 1 pound habit was involved? So, you know, I started telling you that we had set her up to start first thing in the morning to write. Instead of writing once a week, she was writing every day before her kids got up. But before she was able to do that, her 1 pound habit was to get to bed earlier. And it started with half an hour earlier. So she started getting to bed half an hour earlier. And when that became easy, she started going to bed an hour earlier than she had started originally. And when that became easy, of course, when she got to bed half an hour earlier, she woke up half an hour earlier. She only had half an hour to write, but it was better than what she had. And when she got to sleep or go to bed at 1 hour before, she ended up being able to then get up earlier to be able to write. So that was her 1 pound habit. The real one, the first habit that we really worked on was the getting up, not getting up, but getting to bed on time, getting to bed early so that she had enough sleep because your brain, of course, needs sleep, especially when you're about to do something that requires a fair bit of cognitive ability. So, we moved from the 1 hour early to even actually, she realized in a very short period of time that if she got up even a little bit earlier, she could write even more. And within a couple of months, she had written more than half of her book. And so now she started believing that she was an author. So that actually helped. So you want to be able to create those small 1 pound beliefs so that you increase your belief in your ability to create those habits. So what habit will you start? You know, I'm wondering if anybody here has any habits that they feel would probably be a better way to manage willpower. Instead of willpower, you want to use habits. I'm looking here. Did you find a lot of creative genius having a hard time going to bed on time? Yes. It's difficult, and there's a lot of things that have to happen. So Becky is asking, do I find that creative geniuses have a challenge with getting to bed early? And it is a challenge. I find there's a couple of things that happen. First of all, to be able to get to bed early, you need to practice really good sleep hygiene. And I'm someone who suffers from insomnia, so sleep hygiene is something that I've researched from one end to the other because I've been challenged with insomnia for all my life. One of the things that you want to do is start dimming the lights early in the evening. You want to move away from the computer screen early. Like I move away from the computer at 9 o'clock if I want to be in bed and asleep by 11, at least 2 hours before. And if I delay that any longer, I actually delay my sleep onset. Creative geniuses many creative geniuses have a challenge with sleep onset. There's a delay in their sleep onset. So yes, it is definitely a challenge. So you do have to practice amazing sleep hygiene, and you need to make sure that throughout your day you've done something that you enjoyed. Because one of the challenges that I've seen for a lot of people with who are creative geniuses with getting to bed on time is it seems as though if they haven't done anything during the day that they felt was fun, they're always looking for fun somewhere else, either in TV, either on the computer. So you want to be able to create something fun in your day throughout, every single day. It doesn't have to be long. It could be just a short thing. So Dwayne said that he found that he needs a set of habits to go to bed. That's true. So there's creating routines around getting to bed. So even when our kids were little, we used to have a particular way to put them to bed. I remember my daughter, we'd have her in the bath before my youngest daughter, before she went to bed. So she got her in the bath because she had a whole lot of challenges with sleeping. I told her a story. She had a little snack, told her a story, and then tucked her in, and she'd go to sleep. And we actually had some sound that also can help. Some sounds can actually induce sleep, and so having those types of habits to actually get to bed will make a huge difference. So yes, Dwayne, you're totally right. That makes a big difference. So you want to look at what habit could you put in place that would replace having to have willpower. So if you've enjoyed this, if you've just joined us, my name is Linda Walker. I work with creative geniuses who struggle with distraction around their brilliant ideas and follow through procrastination. And I help them channel their energy. And with a clear intent and a very clear path, I help them reach their full potential by unleashing their creative genius. So if you love this and you want more, I will be doing more. Like my page at Creative Genius Coach on Facebook. And so if I conclude, if I kind of give you a summary, I wrote them down because I would have forgotten. There's a lot that was in here. So willpower can be depleted, and creative geniuses we know have less willpower because of their different brain wiring. Decision fatigue can create some problems. So reducing decision fatigue through habits can actually make a huge difference, because habits are mechanical and they don't require decisions once they're set. Habits and even willpower is strengthened with practice. You can also forego or reduce the how much willpower can be or willpower depletion can cause problems by improving your belief in yourself, having a positive mood and a good attitude. You want to avoid temptation as well, and so there's strategies for avoiding temptation. So, for example, if you're trying to lose weight, maybe you might have to change your route. If you drive by a whole bunch of fast food joints with a drive-through, so that might be one thing that you do. You use if-then statements. You want to make sure you have steady blood glucose, so you always have something to eat, a little something to eat, so you don't get hungry. You want small goals, and you want triggers for your event, and that's it. So thank you for joining me. Listen, if there are any more questions, if you have any questions or any comments, please continue to write those comments. I will look at them and I will respond to them if I haven't done so in the video. I really appreciate you being here. It was wonderful to have this interaction with you guys. Again, if you want more of this, like my page at Creative Genius Coach. And the next one will be in a month from now. I usually do these on the second Monday of the month. I'm going to check and make sure that that's okay, because I do travel somewhat, and that's a little bit more challenging. But I will let you know. If you like my page, you'll find out when the next event is. This was Linda Walker. To your focus, action, success.